We're very honored to have Michael Jackson here, who is the former COO of Skype. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
How much time do you need? So I'll just say a little bit. Yeah. So Michael is a partner of Mangrove Capital, which is a venture capital organization based in Luxembourg. He is also a board member of blockchain.com, which is, I think most people would know it. It's one of the largest wallet service providers in the industry. And as kind of a way of introduction, one thing that kind of the first time I really sat up and really paid attention to Michael's name and his work was an opinion piece that he wrote in. I believe it was in CoinDesk. Did anyone actually read that? Are you familiar with that opinion piece? I think it was around, was it 2012, 2013?
I think it was the beginning of 2013. It was February 2013 where, well, on this one or this one, I don't know. February 2000, this one's for everybody. Okay, 2013, February, where one of the things I was noting was the whole Bitcoin story back then and the need for regulation around it. Something that made me extremely unpopular.
Well, it made you very popular with me, and I'll tell you a little bit of a story. So we started organizing Bitcoin Wednesday around then. So there's a backstory here, and I was invited to become a board member of the Bitcoin Foundation of the Netherlands, and so we were really very actively debating among all the board members, and I was in the minority of the first group of board members. People really wanted to kind of actively say, please, regulators, come and regulate and make things clear for all of us. So if we have a lot of clarity, then it will allow things to develop. That is a point of view. And I was in the minority, at least in that board, of saying, let's not waste our time. Let's actually start to do things that the public can see and that, to kind of generate attention. So that was also at the same time that Bitcoin Wednesday first started. The first Bitcoin Wednesdays were organized at that time. And over time, and it was around 2013, I came across this article by Michael, and I said, wow, there's someone who has a lot of business experience is actually saying the kinds of things that I agreed with. And I felt very, very alone for a while, and we started to hold debates, and for a while we were holding polls among the attendees or people that were coming here. And from those polls, we gradually found out that most of the public was actually on the side of, let's give ourselves an opportunity to innovate without rushing to regulate. So, yeah, let's give Michael a round of applause, and let's hear what he has to say about it.
Right. We should be doing the round of applause afterwards, actually, rather than before.
We'll do that too.
All right, that's fine. Let me just get this thing started. This is a guy, as in the introduction you heard, I started with Skype pretty much at the beginning of the whole thing. In fact, I was working with the founders a long time before Skype started. I was working with them all the way back in '97 when we were doing voice over IP in a sort of hosted model where you'd have servers, you'd have all this stuff and whatever, and it basically didn't work. It's way back then. The founders went off, and there's a lot of history and personal history around all of this. They went off and did a network called Kazaa, which was a file-sharing network. And the file-sharing network basically broke for three reasons. One was, sharing files wasn't that great a business model because you went to prison. That was not good. The second thing was there became a lot of competition on it, and the third was the whole system essentially got hacked. And it got hacked not at a privacy level where you're talking about here. It got hacked because the business model of the company was a client with advertising running in it. And somebody managed to produce a copy of the client or a version of the client of their own that could interface with the network perfectly satisfactorily, but had no advertising within it. So what are the users going to do? They're going to use the one which hasn't got any advertising in it. Of course they are, because it's not a pain in the ass. The business model of the company goes away. There are some rumors that was actually done by the adversaries, proving that the attack vectors can come from many different criteria. This guy was one of the guys I met very early in the days of Skype. Actually, it's not really him, but it symbolizes his view. There was a company back in 2003 called MCI WorldCom. It was a US-based telephone company. It's quite famous at the time, and it was famous because it went into bankruptcy along with Enron and a load of other guys right in the 2000s. I met this company the day they came out of bankruptcy, and I was in a room to present Skype because we wanted to connect to the telephone network. And the room was full of about as many people as you are now, proving probably why they went bankrupt. And they were really pleased that day because that was the day they came out of bankruptcy. I remember that because they were allowed to give cookies in the meeting. They were allowed to give biscuits at tea and stuff like that. There was a guy at the back of the room when I presented the business model. He said to me, but you can't do that. I said, what do you mean you can't do that? He said, well, you can't do that because you'll fuck it up for the rest of us. Okay. And then, of course, you don't get your business deal, but you do go home feeling extremely satisfied about all of that. And because after all, I mean, if you can't mess it up for anybody, shouldn't you mess it up for them? Skype was a business model we created because we felt that the world should communicate, that people should communicate. Everything we did was based around one premise, and if you're running a business, I'd certainly advise this, is to have a very, very strong internal moral compass around it. And what we found out, that removing barriers to communication was a fantastic mantra because it guided the conversation around everything you wanted to do. So if you wanted to do, advertising in the client, it doesn't really remove very many barriers to communication. On the other hand, if you want to do video calls, it certainly does. What you do have in a lot of networks, though, is a lot of resistance, a lot of sensor resistance, a lot of problems around network filtering, about traffic filtering and things like that. And we spent an awful lot of time making our traffic as anonymous as it could be. We had a thing called firewall traversal, where basically it meant that we tried to find ways around firewalls by penetrating them from the other side, sending traffic out instead of in, and all sorts of also exciting things. I could talk about this for a very long time. In fact, to the point that we were a peer-to-peer network and we had no weak point. I could go to regulators who call me in, and they say, well, what are you going to do about regulation around telecommunications? I go, absolutely nothing. They go, we'll close you down. I go, well, that's going to be fine because the thing's going to run anyway. It's all based on software. So you can close me down all you want, and you're not going to have anybody to talk to. I mean, you have me to talk to now. If you close me down, put me in prison, I'm going to talk to you, right? So how about being reasonable about it? And most people kind of went away on that idea quite a lot. Thought it was all right. There were various people who wrote these famous white papers about Skype. We never wrote a white paper because it was private. And in fact, somebody like Phil Zimmerman, he was actually quite against us because he had a bit of an open source concept around it. He ended up developing something called Zphone, and he ran a lot of sort of competitive things. It would have been fun to meet him, actually, because he didn't really like us. I've never met him.
We can arrange
he arranged that last night. This is one of the things that came out. It's quite interesting. I was reading on the plane, actually. It was called a P2Peer network, not a peer-to-peer network. They called it a P2Peer network, which I thought was kind of... So if you can't piss on everybody, why not? I'm going to get to the subject in a minute. This is dragging on, but never mind. We do that, and we'd had people writing white papers about detecting Skype flows in web traffic. So to the discussion we just heard, there was a lot connected around that. Is how do you make traffic not just encrypted, which is one thing, but invisible? Because at the meta layer, which is what we're talking about, your company wants to stop you sending traffic out of the network because they felt they wanted to. Your ISP wanted to do it because of that, and we wanted to make the traffic look anonymous, make it look like other stuff. I mean, we're going back a number of years now where traffic analysis technology wasn't as good as it is today, so we could hide stuff, and papers like that talk about, they tried to guess how we were hiding traffic as HTTPS traffic, giving it traffic patterns, so when you were doing a telephone call, it actually had the characteristics of web traffic. It was batched up in sort of web traffic stuff. And we did what we could, and the long and short of it was nobody ever really managed to break that network. And then, of course, when you're going to attack the attacker, you can do various other clever things, like make sure you're on the beta test list for the firewalls of Cisco and various other people who are actually building traffic detection software to counter you. Make sure you're on their beta test, so that when they bring out new software to stop you, you get plenty of time to work on it and get around it. So it really, really annoys them that when they launch it about 2 weeks after it's back up again. Anyway, there we are. There's various tricks, so things weren't there. Anyway, look, I was messing around with Skype for a very long time. We'll be here all night at this rate. And because of that, I got quite intrigued with a lot of this privacy stuff. And one day I was messing around in the west of Scotland in a place called Troon. Troon has a lifeboat. And the guy who runs the lifeboat is a guy called David Irvine. Some of you here may have heard of him. He invented something called MaidSafe. MaidSafe was one of the early protocols to deal with security of information, basically, as having it as an edge node rather than as a server-based network. And David came to me. We met at a Bitcoin conference in London. And I think we were actually here at there was a Bitcoin Foundation meeting way back around the time that you were talking in Amsterdam, quite a large meeting where everybody was here.
That was one of the first ICOs ever.
It was, exactly. And this is where because David came to me as a venture capitalist and said, I want some money. And he presented his project, and it all sounded kind of cool and all of that, like the project we just heard about. And as a VC, you've got to make money out of it. And I asked him how he was going to make money. He didn't really know. And he asked him when he was going to be finished, and he didn't really know. And all of those kind of questions, which as a businessman, you kind of run away from. And I love the guy, and I still talk to him. But he couldn't raise money from the venture community. So what did he do? He did exactly as Richard said. He started what became known as an ICO. So he started raising money for his project, and he did all this. It was all very, tentative at the time, and despite a number of false starts around the thing, on the 23rd of April, my sister's birthday, he sold 6 million of SafeCoin in one sale. Right, this is back in 2014. So absolutely no time. He sold a lot of money and enough to finance his company. So he'd succeeded, really. Instead of going around to all sorts of loser venture capitalists like me who always wanted to be doing money, he was able to get his money back into the company. We go forward, of course, and time goes on, and I want to take us back into sort of the back end of last year with tokenization. What I want to talk about when we get to the end of this thing is how the situation we're in now with tokenizing an ICO is going to completely transform the financial markets, the ability of small businesses to raise money going forward. I got involved with this at Mangrove. I wrote this fancy report. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? So you publish a report, and you're the only one doing the report, and everybody reads it. I'm sure if you read it, you'll think it's rubbish. I did, but lots of people liked it. And it got quite good coverage, and it helped us begin to formulate some ideas. But we know what was going on around here. I like this slide, if it works, which it might. Oh, bollocks. Never works when you want it to, does it? Is it working? Work. Yeah, there we go. You see, this is the history of ICOs. It's getting old now, but I love it. It's probably the last time I'm going to show it. This was 2014. We had a little ICO happen there. We have the European one. This is actually MaidSafe that come around there, right? Each blob represents an ICO. Each color represents a country and the thing we're going through in time. So we've got the end of 14. We've got this thing, we've got the Ethereum ICO that happened back then, the beginning of, well, whenever you know when that was, all of this. And there's sort of this whole thing happening here, and it began to sort of gather pace a bit around 15, but people were talking about it. There's a lot of stateless stuff in there, anonymous things going on. Europe's still there. North America comes in with a single orange blob there, which is what it is. And then things begin to accelerate, right? We all know this. We get an Asian one coming along. We get the DAO, which was, well, we know the DAO, right? But anyway, it was big. And these things come bobbling along there. Asia comes along. America begins to get going. North America gets going a bit. North America's a bit behind. North America's always a bit behind, in my view. But there we are. And on it goes. And then the whole thing, as you remember, at the back end of last year, begins to just explode, right? We've got millions of them. We've got Bancor from Israel, and so on. On we go, on we go, on we go. And everybody's at it. And you think, well, what the hell's going on here? Like, is this a lot? Or what's going on? Try and put this into some sort of context. Are ICOs interesting in the financial markets in general? There's a number at the top there, $6 billion US. And that was at the back end of last year. That was the total amount of funds raised by token sales. You've got all this going on here. And we all know these projects. There's lots of names on them. Most of us in this room know many of them. You can knock this off. I stole this from elementus.io, so if you want to go and grab it yourself, do that. They haven't done an updated one, unfortunately, so I can't steal that. Some of these projects were quite good. Some of them were rubbish. This was something I was involved with. This was Valentine's Day, the world's most valuable crypto artwork, proof of love on the blockchain. Isn't that great? And then you've got other things that you don't even really know what they mean. The cryptocurrency for the mobility ecosystem. blockchain powered mobility, Dovo. You may have heard of Dovo. What's interesting about this is it's actually not really an ICO. It's Jaguar-backed. Jaguar Land Rover, a mainstream motor car manufacturer, is suddenly in the ICO market, right? This is not kind of dodgy people selling scam roses like me. This is real companies doing real stuff. And some of this stuff's getting official, right? I mean, this is the SEC Form D from a weird company. Some of you maybe some people have heard of Telegram? I don't know. 850 million US dollars, right, raised on that. In fact, before we'd even put the whole thing to bed, they'd raised 1.7 billion through what were token sales. And why is that interesting? Well, look at the top here, $6 billion from before. And now look at this slide, which is very complicated. This shows the amount of venture capital money that's been raised in different centers, United Kingdom, France, Germany, and things over the years. And if I look at this in the United Kingdom over the last 3 years, they've raised 9 billion euro. Now, in my world, 9 billion euro and $6 billion is kind of the same order of magnitude, right? It's not that bad. So this is significant. So the fact that all the VCs have got their heads up their asses, not even accepting the fact that there is a thing called an ICO, for me was quite telling. 6 billion of that, you know, and 8 billion, 10 billion of that, it's the same order of magnitude. I think it's significant. And it's continuing, right? It's continuing today. This is the last 3 months. More data knocked off from somebody, you know, about 2 billion per month, which is some. The last month knocked out of the park, or whatever you call it, by EOS. But even putting that aside, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on in there. How does my industry respond? How does the investment industry respond? Well, we're doing lots of things, right? But we're not doing much. And how's business responding? What do business do? Well, business financing is kind of interesting at the moment. If you want to build like some smoke exhaling power station or whatever it is, a factory, it's quite easy. VW can do a $2 billion bond to build a new factory. Easy as pie, right? In these times, infrastructure, everybody's heard of VW, they raise it. If you're running a little software company at the moment, an internet company, it's not too bad either. In fact, you can come rocking up to somebody like us, and it's a bit of a fucked up process because it's all confused and you have to go to all sorts of meetings and it's a bit boring and all of that, but it's sort of essentially fundraising. If you're a guy with a shed, with a project, you're completely stuffed. You've got nowhere to go. No VC is going to listen to you. But there are lots of people who are going to listen to you, and they're your customers. And this is where I think we can introduce genuine innovation or genuine addition to the funding world. Imagine this guy, nice looking guy, standing there in his coffee shop, a bit bored. He's actually missing a coffee machine, right? He needs one of them. And what can he do to get his coffee machine? Well, he can go to all of these things, these seeders and crowdfunding agencies, go around his friends and family. But in this room, we have one motto, I think, and it's this motto: in code we trust. It's one of the original Bitcoin mottos, and we believe that we can write contracts, we can write things we can trust, we can rely on. We know that code works, sort of, most of the time, sometimes anyway. And in code we trust. Can we do something? How do we build code into our coffee machine story? Well, imagine this. If our friend here wants to raise money for his coffee machine, what does he do? He goes to us and he asks us for some money. And we like him because we quite like his coffee. It's a nice coffee shop. We can build into the financial flows now. You call it through sensors, you can call it through the cash apparatus, you can do all sorts of things. You can, through code, build into this the mechanism to repay yourself your loan as you lent money to the guy. So the guy can come to me and he can say, I'd like to, come to all of us. So I'd like to buy 5,000 euro I need 5,000 euro for my coffee machine, and I'm going to pay you guys back for like 10 cents for every single cup of coffee I sell. Through the code, we can get access to that 10 cents, right? Assuming we can audit it, assuming we can look at it, we can get into his cash register, we can get into the coffee machine. It can even automatically transfer the money to us. We don't need to bother about it anymore. Isn't that different from the guy than having to run down to the bank, and even he can get his loan for his coffee machine. If it's 5,000 euro, he's going to commit to pay, I don't know, 100 euro a month forever. And if he's got a shit month because it's summer and there's no customers buying coffee, he's still having to pay the 100. If it's a really cold day where he's sold tons of coffee, then he can afford to pay a bit more. The code can sort all these things out. And that's just one example how code can change funding methods for people. This is an example, this is just a boring clip of some stuff we did around employee stock option plans in Berlin, which is on a smart contract and executing today for a 500-person stock option plan within a company. It's quite good. Seems to work, seems to help. Anyway, we've got a friend there. And at the moment, crowdfunding's a big thing. It's a big thing in Asia Pacific. It's not that big thing in America, and it's a useless thing in Europe. You don't want to go anywhere. You can't get it. The platforms don't exist here. So this is why I'm going to make this a bit of a European focus last couple of minutes here. Let's go to this. Let's look at bank lending. This is in Britain. This is bank lending to SMEs in Britain over the last 6 years or 5 years or something. It's basically going down and it's flat and all of that. Do you and I really think that people don't want money anymore to run small businesses? I think they do. We hear that 50% of the workforce is going towards freelancers, and a lot of these guys are wanting money, right? They're not getting the money. There's a hole here. And it's a hole that the European Central Bank have even come into play with. The amount of money that's been lended to small businesses is collapsing now. So if you've got a coffee shop and you want a coffee machine, even if you've got the best business plan in the world, you're going to get one. You're not going to get one, right? And that's kind of shit. So where are you going to get the money from? Well, you're probably not going to get it from the bank. I mean, if you want to go to the bank, this is kind of opening hours at a bank, right? In like Monday to Friday, 10 to 4, first, third and fifth Saturday, 10 to 4, second and fourth Saturday closed, lunch, this, that and the other. I mean, they're never going to be damn well open, right? You're never going to figure it out. So how are you going to do it? I mean, you've got to come into a 20th century model, or 21st century we're in now, aren't we? 21st century model for funding. And of course, as we know, electronics is what's going to do it. And, you know, I go to my favorite subjects. What do we talk about electronic networks? The Visa network, of course, for all we criticize it, it seems to run 24 hours a day. In fact, the Bitcoin network runs pretty much all the time as well. So why shouldn't ICOs run all the time? Why shouldn't you be able to raise capital 24 hours a day? Well, of course you can. With a normal ICO, you can. But how's that going to happen, right? We've got lots of ICOs happening today. It's all a bit of a mess. Trading the tokens is, you know, it's all on somewhat, can you persuade some random exchange to list the token and all that kind of thing? How are you going to do it? How are you going to manage it if it's a token-based thing? Which network are you going to have with sufficient scale and speed to manage lots of transactions, even from this coffee machine? If you've got a lot of coffee machines going, the Ethereum's network's probably going to stop, right? So we're not even quite there yet. So we need network level, we need protocol level stuff going on, and we need platforms. But the platforms we've got now are kind of messed. We've got CoinList, for example, whatever, for ICOs. And you've got that word there, investors. The problem we have now is investors have to be what's called accredited investors, and accredited investors are like professional venture funds and things like that. If you want to invest in it as a normal guy, you kind of can't, which is shit for the guy with the coffee machine. But we're seeing the growth of decentralized exchanges, right? We're seeing the growth of decentralized stock exchanges. We're seeing the growth of decentralized platforms. And they take us, like Skype did, away from regulation. Back into the regulation thing we came in is just a little bit. We want to lift ourselves above, and I think the community needs to lift ourselves above always falling down into what will the regulators say? When is this a securities token? What is the SEC going to say? And the reason that Skype was successful was not that we broke the rules or ignored the rules, is we worked around the rules. We found alternative ways of the rules working, and we need to be thinking about the alternative way around the rules for the benefit of society around here. Because I have an issue, right? I have an issue. My big issue is this, you know? Why should the 1% be the only ones who can invest in stuff? It's not what we want, right? It's not really what we want. You have to be an accredited investor to invest anything. Why do the 1% get richer by investing in startups? Why is everybody that's invested in the Telegram ICO actually a venture fund because the minimum ticket size was 25 million, right? They're all rich people theoretically getting rich, unless they lose it all on Telegram, of course, but that's a different story. But the 1%, why should the 1% be the only one? Because why should communication, like back then, be restricted to people who are rich? If you lived in a foreign, abroad from your parents, it costs you a lot of money to phone home. When my mother was growing up, when I was young, my mother's sister lived in Canada, and we had to book a phone call. right, on Christmas Day. You had to actually book a phone call. It was like mega expensive and you had to book a time for it. And I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that old. It's not that long ago this kind of shit was happening. Skype removed that completely, so why should rich people be the only ones allowed to invest in projects? And of course you need governance, and of course you need all sorts of stuff. But why not if you want to? I've got a couple of predictions to end with, right? This is one of them. This is one I started with, actually. This is an old one from 2013. I said this: if you're a large fund, you've got 500 million or 5 billion or something, I've said putting $1 million into Bitcoin is not the stupidest thing you could do. This is back in 2013. The upside potential is huge, and you made your money by taking some form of risk, and those risks were probably far higher than Bitcoin. Well, if you put $1 million into Bitcoin in 2013 and listened to me, you wouldn't be here, right? You'd be on your yacht. And I wouldn't be here either if I'd taken my own advice. I'd be on my fucking yacht. But anyway, there you go. So I'm going to make another prediction. I predict this: in 5 years, non-accredited investors will be helping fund 50 billion euro small businesses using distributed ledger and self-executing contracts in Europe alone. I'm going to write that down, and you can come back to me and see if it's right or not. But I genuinely think we can get to that point, and I think the technology allows us to get there. And so what does it matter? It's a bit of a macro thought, of course, and how do you do it comes onto these platforms. That's why I've personally got mega involved in Neufund, which is a project driving Mangrove's philosophy, doing distributed exchanges. I think they're really important for just getting things done. Because tokenization, it may have implications for the venture capital industry. This is what I wrote a year ago, but I think it's the end of bank lending. I think we can do that. I think we can really transform bank lending. And I think that's going to make a mega difference. And of course, it's people like you that make it happen. Why do we make it happen? We make it for people like this, who needs to raise money to bring his business out of his shed to be a decent-sized business. And we can do that. We can help him. As a community, we can help him, give the tools to people, normal people like that, to do that. Because you remember at the beginning there was a guy who was kind of frightened and said I couldn't do it when you came to Skype. Well, I want that guy to be the same guy now. I want the circle to go round, and I want this to be the guy in the lending department of like ING or something. And if we can make him a bit scared, we can fund our businesses through the community. We can allow people to invest in those businesses and get rich through the good projects, not to be scammed by the bad projects, and enable it all through code. I think we can double the size of the European economy within 5 years. That's what I wanted to say.
Absolutely.
And I'm not going to take questions because you're going to ask me how to do it or something, and then I'll be screwed.
No, we would
No,
very
I will
much
take
like to
questions.
ask some questions
Go
if we
on.
could.
Sorry.
So I'd like to start off with the security token, utility token thing, because it comes
Right.
right back to where we started with the regulations.
Right, we've got this paradigm of security token, utility token. So there's a thing called a security, right, which is something that it's always been very restricted. And then there's kind of everything else. So it's not whether you're a security or a utility, it's whether you're a security. If you're security, you're in the shit. If you're or not in the shit, you're in a regulatory nightmare. And if you're a utility, you're not. Securities were something constructed by the authorities to regularize and sort of put things into different boxes in the old days as financial technology was being generated. And a lot of rules and regulations came around that as to why we needed securities. And one of the main rules is, can you buy them, or can you sell them, or can you market them to people? This is really where a lot of this nonsense comes into place, is are you allowed to market securities to people? Now, I have a good friend who, I don't know if we should call him a friend. He is a friend now. He wouldn't have been a friend when he went to prison. And he went to prison in the back end of the 80s for running a boiler room, as it's called, in London, which is basically a basement. Yeah, some of us would remember them, right? Basically, you phoned old ladies and sold them shares in companies that didn't exist, right? Kind of like ICO, right? Same deal. And those guys went to prison, and a lot of regulation came out of the back of that to stop that happening, because that's clearly a bad thing to be happening. We don't want people cheating people, right? That's the whole thing. A lot of the securities comes out of it. The biggest threat to my dream is something called ESMA, the European Securities and Markets Association. It's 5,000 people based in Paris who've got bugger all else to do now because they introduced a load of regulation on funds, and now they're thinking of applying it to crowdfunding. And there's 5,000 Parisians applying this French bureaucracy through the European Union to crowdfunding. I mean, the best thing we can do is turn their electric off or something so they can't do anything. And I think that's a big danger. But I think what the original, sorry, this is a long answer to a short question. Security legislation was brought about to protect people in investing. And in those days, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have access to information, you didn't have visibility of projects, you didn't have, you had the annual financial reports of companies and things like that to judge yourself about. It's how it used to work in the old days, and you showed up at somebody and bought some shares or some shit. And now you don't have that, right? Now we have an information society where my company, these ICO companies or these have never been more visible than they are today, right? You can have a company running, and some guy you can be writing a report about this company 24 hours a day. Is how it's getting on, where the customers are going. We see that even in our listed companies. Mangrove, we have a couple of listed companies in our portfolio, one actually, and alongside that, there's analysts who track it officially, but there's other people on the bloody internet who are tracking it, and they're measuring web traffic, and they're measuring all sorts of nonsense to see whether this thing's a good company or not. And that control is coming in, and I don't think we need the same level for certain types of company as we've had to do this. And I think we need to convince the authorities that, calm down a bit. Joe in his coffee shop, with his friends, I mean, I won't say what could go wrong, but his friends could lose their money, right? But they know Joe. That's the thing. You're always going to be worried about problems. Let's think about the solution. And we need to do that. We need to get the regulators into a slightly more comfortable place. And one thing unfortunately, probably the scam ICOs need to be called out a lot more than they are now. And I think we're seeing monitoring tools now, which are again, people. It's a thing. It's a phase. There you go. I'll go on all night.
So it sounds like you're leaning toward kind of the perspective or the point of view that I might have. Does it actually move into your investment activity? For example, would you advise some of your investees with a good ICO idea? Would you advise them to launch a utility token?
I would advise to it. So utility tokens themselves, we've seen lots and lots and lots of projects or companies. I don't like people calling things projects. It sounds like something you're doing in your spare time rather than companies or something. But I've yet to see, in fact, if anybody has got really good examples of utility tokens or a token economy that's genuine, I'd actually be kind of interested in it, because I think most of them aren't. They're really, really difficult to make. Buying tokens to use in an environment is okay. I mean, to buy credits to use in a system, we've known that for donkey's years. But to have an economy where the whole ecosystem actually uses them forever without the company needing to sell more of their hard cap to keep putting tokens into the system kind of intrigues me. There aren't many of them. So in terms of utility tokens that way, yeah. But if you do have token economics, well, yeah, sure, use them like mad. Are we advising companies to do ICO? Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
So here I would kind of argue that there are many more potential utility tokens, but they're being convinced not to do that. So most of your colleagues in the industry are telling them to do the safe thing. Obviously, we had I found this kind of a sad counterexample. We had someone presenting an ICO at our last event, which is designed to protect the environment. And so they can only sell, they're doing in the US, they can only sell to accredited investors. So only accredited investors could actually invest in, say, saving the rainforests or something like that. So I think there are many, many more than that. But go on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's right. Exactly what you said. That's so far why I think this whole thing's wrong. Is why, I mean, accredited investors probably aren't going to invest in saving the rainforest because you don't make money saving the rainforest, right? I mean, you might or whatever, but probably not. I want to get money from everybody else who thinks it's a really good idea to save the rainforest, and why not? We need a mechanism to do it. Yeah, who am I? You're the ball thrower.
I'm going to just throw one, just add my 2 cents here. The best thing about this ICO mechanism that we have is that it gives us a way to put the tokens into the hands of the intended users. And if your intended users are accredited investors, by all means, launch a security token. And otherwise, maybe you might you know,
Get me on that.
talk to Michael, for example. Anyway, questions?
Yes.
Thanks. The technology you're talking about for using tokens to basically be used for capital markets, so companies can raise equity or raise debt in the future using this, is ultimately going to disintermediate big institutional groups like investment banks who make a lot of money through operating in that area. So what's the risk that, you know, these people club together and say, can we put pressure on regulators to not actually let this go ahead because this is a nice lunch for us?
I think that there are various regulatory frameworks around the world. The US one is extraordinarily corrupt, fundamentally corrupt. I was shocked when I interacted with it the very first time. If anybody's ever done it and gone to Congress and paid for a meeting with a senator in the hope that they'll put a question to Congress on your behalf or support you in the thing, I was absolutely shocked. I thought America was Anyway, try it. I think in Europe, in general, the regulators, the bureaucracies, they actually want the best. They don't tend to be particularly supportive of the establishment. They're interested. Their job is very well laid out. It's protecting of the consumer and various things like that, and the system, of course. But when you talk about messing with the system, they have a systemic responsibility. But that's the fundamental, like, does Holland have any money tomorrow? Or can Holland pay its bills? Or what happens if, you know, Rabobank goes broke or something? These are sort of big ass questions. They're not really, we're a long way from systemic with any of this stuff. And I think before anybody notices, the other thing is they're going to change. They're going to kind of get into this space as well, and we don't want to be dragged down into their old world again. It's horrible. It's like VCs getting involved with tokens, ICOs. It's ooh. One more question. Sorry, I'm talking too much. There's a gentleman there who's been. Yeah.
Very interesting talk, and I'm particularly interested in the relationship you had. First of all, with Skype and looking at. I'm from CryptoDash and. I run a crypto exchange, a newly launched crypto exchange. So one of the things we do, for example, is have a type of, first of all, we have a very important relationship to have with the regulators, because we try to work in a regulated environment as we're aiming for institutional money. And that makes it very important for us to talk to regulators. But the way we're talking to regulators is that we're saying that today new auditing techniques, new ways you keep track of companies is because there are 100 phonetics per project watching that project every day, because probably they put $5,000 or even $500, but you have constant feedback on what's going on with the various projects. So we're trying to basically educate the regulator in accounting for that as a metric of self-regulation and self-involvement of the system. This is one work that we're doing. But I'm interested in what was your approach? Obviously, telecom was much less regulated than finance, okay? We agree on that. We're talking about different beasts. But I'm very interested on your approach in your relationship, constant relationship with the regulator. Was there a relationship? Was there no relationship? What was your approach to the regulator? Our approach is education today. We can?
Yeah, education is really powerful, because most regulators and people, I mean, they're people, right? And they want to make rules, and they want to do stuff, and they want to do the best thing. Most people want to do the best thing. And education is really the biggest thing we can do about all of this. Where this binary, this sort of, you asked about our relationship, education was the main thing. And if we couldn't get towards education, arrogance was the next.
Yes. I used to start with that. No, I'm sorry.
We were invited by the Dutch Nederlandse Bank to have a session there, and we talked about this issue, and they're not going to budge. They're very strongly, at least the people that we spoke to, very strongly of the opinion that money laundering and anti-terrorist financing are concerned, and that ICOs are a possible mechanism. And I'm very skeptical, but that's what they told us. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of work being done on that, and Chain Analysis and others have done a lot of reporting out of that. And I think in general the community is aware of that as the need to get that done and to stop it. I mean, we've got fantastic I mean, my next thing is identity, of course. If anybody's interested in virtual currency, then not virtual identity, but identity is a thing that's super important. And identity within wallets and tied to transactions and things like that actually goes a long way to eliminate criminal activities. There's a lot of work being done in the criminal community to try and work out, by which I mean criminals, in the criminal community. Like drug dealers are trying to figure out how to do all this shit, right? Of course they are. And the police are on top of this very much, and they're finding examples naturally, but I mean, I think their general view is it's too complicated.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Hi. So you mentioned that the SME financing by banks in Europe was going down, but I mean we all know that like bank financing for SMEs was the backbone in the EU economy, but well, EU also started like in the past 10 years or more to support different alternative ways of financing SMEs through, let's say, different markets in stock exchange, traditional stock exchange, and actually they emerged on 1990s. They were unsuccessful at first, and other ones emerged in 2000s, like AIM was one of the successful ones, but still they don't see the like potential they were planned to, and when you look at it, like you also said that 1%, why doesn't the 1% invest in these? But the main investors on those SME growth markets are retail investors, in fact, rather than institutional investors. But I mean, still there is not enough liquidity and everything. And in fact, compared to ICOs, they offer some regulations and protection towards the investors. So when these markets are there and they can't reach their potentials, how do you see this becoming a real thing for retail investors? And apart, as a second question, well, if you see, how do you see any role of traditional stock exchange in the ICO game at all?
Yeah, good one. The last question's easy. We just on the traditional stock exchange, because this is, in fact, cooperation that Neufund, I'm an investor in Neufund stuff, Binance, the Malta Stock Exchange, we've come together to actually build an ICO-based stock exchange. That's a detail. I just want to cover the last question off to say it's actually happening, and this is all kind of regulated. And Binance, I mean, it kind of has to be sort of proper. Because Malta, if you've got a stock exchange there, it's accessible to the European Union, and they can't do too much on the edge, otherwise they won't be able to sell into Holland, for example. The Holland regulator will say this Malta lot are a load of nonsense. To your big question, which was, I'm talking about a completely different level, right? In Europe, the backbone of the economy is small companies. It's 0 to 10 people companies. It's not companies who can list on AIM or can list on, whatever, or the mid-sized exchanges. Yeah, sure, when they get there, it's a different story. And they're the people we need to invest in, right? The people like you and me who want to start a little business together, and, we need to get a bit of cash together. It's going to be impossible. Try going to the bank yourself. I've tried. They won't give me any fucking money.
So Michael, it's been a policymaker's dream that we would eventually have some type of a global funding source for the tech sector in, say, the Netherlands or other countries in Europe. And now that we suddenly have it there, they seem to be, tightening it up and frustrating it. It's difficult to even to open up bank accounts and so on. Yeah. What is the real cause of that? Is it truly? I find it very hard to believe that it is terrorist financing and money laundering that's stopping them.
I think it's a lack of knowledge and a fear, generic fear about it, much more than, or an uncertainty. And back to your question on knowledge, I think the more as a community, if you want, around loosely the power of technology to help with funding, which has been shown through ICOs, and I'm not saying everything has to be an ICO and done on the blockchain or anything like that. The power of technology in funding is absolutely incredible. And we need to educate them that there's something more than a business loan that you pay back per month or an equity investment. And I think it's just going to come, and things take time. I mean, they do take the time they take. 9 months is a baby, and it doesn't matter how quickly you push, it doesn't come any quicker, right? Sometimes.
No, thank you for that perspective. That's a valuable one. Thank you.
So looking back, if times were different,
Yep.
would Skype have been an ICO? And
Yep.
if so or not, how would that ever be sold to Microsoft?
Yeah. The second question is a really good one. So if you do have a company which is ICO, don't reckon on selling it to anybody because you've got a huge complication, right, about where does the value sit. If the value is sitting in a token economy, which is out in the free world, your fundamental business, perhaps it's not, the traditional view of the business, the equity value of the business is worth nothing. So whereas Mangrove invest in companies that are doing ICO or in this space, we do a kind of 50-50 deal, right? You get some equity, we get some tokens, because you want to preserve the down. And if you're planning on doing anything else, we want a bit of that as well, The first part of the question, would Skype have done it? So we were quite fortunate because we had a business model from day one where we could sell phone calls to people who weren't on the network. So we weren't really very cash constrained. But I think exactly to go to the users, and we have many users, is a perfect example. So, how would we have funded Skype? Would be to go to the community. Say I have 100 million people who are using this thing. A bit like Telegram started with. That was the whole idea of their first ICO, is we could go, first plans on ICO is we'd go out to our community. We've got hundreds of millions of people using it, and they believe in the system, they use it, they believe it's a good thing. And they're not that averse to the fact it doesn't necessarily give them a massive financial reward because they kind of like it anyway, It's like giving money to a rock band or something like that. You kind of like it, so why not? Not as a donation. If it goes well, it goes well. So would we have done an ICO in today's climate? I think the answer is probably yes.
Last question.
Thank you for the great talk. I had a question. If we now look today at the ICO models and the token economics of these ICOs, as an investor, how do you look at them? And would you yourself invest in most ICOs you see today? And also the part of the due diligence. I think a lot of due diligence that I see if I go into a lot of communities try to research an ICO or a project that just recently launched, I just ask some difficult questions and they kick me out. If I ask some questions about token economics or some questions about what's a token life cycle, and then they just censor it.
I think there's your answer, right? If somebody wants something from you and they're not prepared to explain what it's all about, then you should walk away. Just as if somebody asks you what's in the beer and they won't tell you, then better not drink it.
Yeah, but then you said it's not really self-regulation. I love the idea, but I think it's an utopia that we maybe will never reach.
Self-regulation is one thing, but the fact there's a lot of visibility around things. We've got this idea about open source. Again, I'm not sure if it's absolutely true, but because open source is out there and everybody's looking at the code and monitoring the code and stuff, then it's going to be more reliable and more secure.
But they don't want that. They invested 5,000 euros, so they want to go up to an exchange, so they can flip it and then go away.
Well, there you go, right? Is that what you really want? Is that why you're investing in a business, right? And if you want to be doing flipping, that's...
No, of course I don't want that, but that's...
It's the flippening's happening, yeah. I think when you, as we all know, right? When you want to go and buy something or do something, you check out what it's all about, right? You go and look at reviews. If you're buying a new TV, you go look at reviews and all of this stuff. If you're buying portions of a project, you go and check it out, check out the people, all of that. It's what VC spend a lot of time on. I think a crowdsourcing of that's going to come, and with that's dangerous because, of course, you can manipulate that market, right? I can pretend to be a super expert on something or other, and you can pay me to write all sorts of shit, and I'll probably do it.
Yeah. That's what's happening now.
That's what I do every day.
That illegal behavior is illegal now, even without any regulations, I should say.
I think that's actually I think that's a really important part. Is breaking the law, you go to prison, right? And for all of the things we talk about, my backstop is always you go to prison because the law is the law. And yes, you can't catch some dude in the back end of Mongolia and put him in prison, but actually you can,
The one requirement that I'd like really to see for the ICO market is that all of you get more familiar with seeing like really bad ones and decent ones and excellent ones so that you can just simply compare, because none of these regulations are going to make any of us better investors. Actually you learn by
well that's right. For all of the regulation around regulation around securities products, derivatives and all of that kind of shit, I tell you, you can lose money faster than I can drink beer, I tell you, on that stuff. You can, and it doesn't make it a great product.
So let's give Michael a round of applause. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
you.